It's been about 8 months now since I worked at Target. And if you're a regular subscriber, you know that I worked there part time from July of 2018 to January of this year, 2019. If you want to know the simple explanation of why I quit, it was simply because when I started my new job in January of this year, I had 4 jobs and something had to go. That's the very simple explanation. But if you want to know why I quit Target, the job that I actually kind of liked, versus Whole Foods, which I didn't like at all, then keep watching. The reason I started working at Target in the first place was because I was working full time as a recruiter for Lyft. But about a month and a half into me working at that position, they cut our pay pretty significantly from being paid a base wage plus commission to commission only. So even though I continued to work there full time, I had to find a way to make more money. I applied a few places, and Target was simply the first place that hired me. It seemed to work out. I have a lot of prior retail experience, most of it in management, but I applied to be a cashier, so having all that previous retail experience, just being a cashier a couple days a week, shouldn't be a problem for me to learn at all. In fact, it was actually 4 years exactly to the day from my last day at American Eagle, which I'll link my experience up above to my video that I made about working at American Eagle. 4 years to the day from the day I quit there to the day that I started at Target for this position. Starting out, Target's interview process was a little bit frustrating because at the time I didn't have a car and I was around using rideshare. So the way that the interview process went was that I had a Part A and a Part B interview, which they didn't tell me about until I had actually finished the Part A. What was supposed to happen is that they were supposed to be back to back, but they made me come in 2 separate times in order to do 2 separate interviews with 2 different people. The first interview went well. We went on to the second interview, and come to find out that the person doing the second interview used to be a model at Abercrombie and Fitch. And I do think that that is a part of how I got this job, was because of that. I also later found out that the ETL HR, which essentially in Target speak is the assistant manager who's in charge of human resources, she also was a model at Abercrombie. So I think that the connection to Abercrombie in my past, that really helped to secure me this position in the first place. And during that second interview, I had to fill out a form showing how many hours per week I was looking to get. And originally when I applied, I had said 25. But that would mean that I'd be working 65 hours a week every week. And I realized that that was just too much. So I asked them to change it down to 20 hours, and I saw that they did change it on the form. No big deal, but this does definitely play into the story a bit later. My first day, which was technically just orientation and some training, was July 16th. And at that time, we sat in the back room, which was adjacent to the break room. And during this, there were a few concerning things that happened. So the first thing was, as we went around the table and talked about ourselves and told what we did, I mentioned to the ETL HR, who was running the training program, my other jobs. And really, I was just saying it to everybody in the crowd because everybody was talking about what other jobs they worked. And she made a comment, something like, "Oh, you didn't tell me that," and kind of made it out like she wouldn't have hired me had she known I had these other jobs. But I mean, I did tell her that because I interviewed with her just days before. So that was a little concerning. The other thing that stood out about that meeting to me that kind of concerned me was that she was extremely adamant that it is Ohio state law that we must take a half-hour break and 2 15-minute breaks. And she was just very adamant about this. And while I appreciate that Target gives you 15-minute breaks, because I've never had an employer ever anywhere who allows that, let alone enforces it, it was concerning to me that the person in charge of our breaks, and in fact for HR for the entire store, was claiming that this was a state law, when in fact Ohio does not force employers to give any breaks whatsoever, even a lunch break. So for the person who was in charge to be so adamant about this and not understand the difference between a Target policy and a state law, I was a little concerned. And yeah, it sounds like so far I'm being nitpicky, but I think you'll see later on in the story that maybe I was right to be concerned about this person. The first problem that I encountered at Target happened really almost immediately after that first day of training. At the end of the training day, our ETL HR told us that we were to take a paper, which was a form where we manually filled out a time card until we were put into the system. And it did take 2 weeks or so for me to be able to clock in with the time clock, or with the time clock. And until then, I had to fill this thing out manually. And she said to give it to her directly. I don't think, in retrospect, there was any reason that it was her directly and exactly only her that needed to have this form. There was an assistant in the HR office. We also could have just dropped it off in the HR office. But I'm new to the company and I didn't know that. So because she had told us to give it directly to her, this problem arose. So I worked that day and she recorded that day in the system for us. But there was a shift later in the week that I worked as well. And it was, I think, about a 5-hour shift. Well, I recorded it on my time card form, and I kept checking for her to be there at the office. Now, at this time, she had a dry erase board out on her door with her hours. And it was kind of inconvenient to find her because she worked about 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day, and I generally was on evening shifts. But I made a couple of special trips up there to try to get this form to her, and she just wasn't there. She wasn't in the office and she wasn't in the store during the times that she was supposed to be working. So I was not able to get my time card submitted, and because of that, when I got paid, I only had that one shift that I had done for training. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing this. If I'm not going to get paid for the hours that I'm working, I'm just not going to be working here. So it's the not even a month into working there, and I'm already like, I'm probably going to have to quit. The same thing was true of the second week, because I still couldn't use the time clock, so I had to record my hours in the same way. So because this had happened with the first paycheck and I didn't get paid for the second shift, I'm like, well, I'm not going to get paid for any of the shifts on this next week, because I still can't clock in, and this person who told me only to give this form to her is never there. The second problem arose the third week in, because I had like 9 hours that first week, 5 hours the second week, and then on the third week, I was scheduled for 38 and a half hours. Now they know that I have a full-time job, and they know, and I have seen the form that records that my max availability is 20 hours. But yet they scheduled me for 38 and a half hours. That means that I was working 78 and a half hours that week, between my full-time job, which was flexible so I could work my hours around it, and Target. But here's the thing. I've never talked about this on this channel because this came up long before I ever started making videos. But I had the chance out of college to be an ETL at Target. ETL's executive team lead or assistant manager. Now, I went through 7 interviews and I ended up not hearing back after the 7th interview, but I must have been pretty close to getting hired into that position. I don't think I could have taken it had they offered it to me, because the store they were trying to put me at was like an hour and a half away from where I lived instead of the store in the town where I lived. I just don't think I could have done it. But still, I'm looking at this as, look, if I wanted to work full-time at Target, I would just go apply right now to be an ETL. I got so close to getting the position before. I have much more retail experience since then. I know I would be a shoo-in for the position. I'm not going to work at Target full-time for $13 an hour. And in fact, it was not $13 an hour when I worked there. I started at 11 and it went up to 12. I think it actually went up to 13 after I left. So I'm not working for $11 or $12 an hour full time, because what this was doing was cutting into the time that I had to work on stuff for Lyft, which meant that my overall pay was quite a bit decreased. Once I discovered the scheduling issue, I was like, I have to talk to somebody about this because I cannot work these hours. And I very soon found that the problem was that at Target, I know it's cliche, but you very much are just a number and no one cares. Nobody, like, I went and I talked to my GSAs, I talked to my GSTL, um, I even talked to another ETL, but it had to specifically be this manager that I talked to, and like I said, she was never there on the time she was scheduled. So what I actually did finally to remedy this is I went online and I found the format for the email address for the store. So it was like a whole chain of stuff at Target.com. And what it did is it essentially sent this out to the entire HR team at this store, which was like 2 or 3 people. But I explained my situation and I said, hey, I'm scheduled for 38 and a half hours this week, and that is absolutely way too much. I took this position based on working here 20 hours a week. This is cutting into my full-time position. I was like, but I realize that the schedule's already created and can't be changed, so I will work this week for this many hours, but I will not ever do this again. I'm only doing this to help you out, so that you don't get screwed over on nobody being there for those shifts or being understaffed for them. I also, in the same email, brought up my pay issue for the pay that was not paid on the previous paycheck for the first week I was there, and what had not yet been recorded for my work for the second week. I do have to say that I was surprised that she emailed me back within a couple of hours, and she was like, oh, I'm so sorry, this will absolutely be taken care of, and as far as your hours, I will make sure that those are paid out to you as well. And on the second point, that is true. They did eventually pay those 5 hours. But even that could not have been any more messed up. They pay them out maybe a month or 2 months later. And then probably 5 months down the road, I'm working with her, which I never work with her because she's never on the floor. And I'm working with her at guest service, and she comes up to me and says, and she acts like I'm an idiot. Like, the check has been there all along, and it's just that I haven't picked it up. And she's like, there's a check in the safe for you. And number one, I worked at guest services, so I passed out paychecks, and I know it wasn't in there. And number two, the times that I picked up my paycheck and somebody else looked for it for me, it also wasn't in there. So she was trying to play it off like it'd been there all along and I was just an idiot. But what happened, because this person just could not mess things up anymore, is that they paid it out twice. And at that point, I'm like, you know what? I'm just not even going to address this, because if I address that they paid me twice for this, they're just going to mess something else up, and I'm just not going to deal with it. So they actually did, within 5 months of that, pay me out twice for that 5 hours. And as far as the scheduling issue, she told me, thank you for sticking with the schedule this week, and next week your schedule will be different. During my third week there, while I'm working that 38 and a half hours for that week, the schedule was posted for the following week, which she said she had fixed, and I am given 31 and a half hours. So at this point, obviously I'm working 80 hours that week. I don't have a lot of time to sit down and write a long email again explaining everything to her. And even though I worked there 38 and a half hours that week, I never saw her once. So I couldn't do anything about it, and I couldn't talk to her about it. I did finally get a chance midweek to send out an email again and say, hey, I can't work this. And I got no response. No response at all. So later in the week, I sent another email and I said, hey, I haven't heard back from you. I told you last week I would work those hours last week to help you out, but I'm starting to feel like I'm being taken advantage of because, yes, I do have an open availability because my full-time job is flexible, but I explained that this is cutting into it and my max hours are supposed to be 20, and at this point I'm not even receiving a response from you, so I'm just letting you know that I'm no longer coming in for any of my shifts until this is resolved. And I made it clear that I wasn't quitting, but that I was just trying to get her to fix the situation. And I was increasingly getting more and more frustrated and, quite frankly, angry because I felt like I was being taken advantage of by Target. And because the company hierarchy is set up in a way that you cannot address any problems that come up, I just felt trapped. And I felt like my only option was to leave. So I sent the email, didn't get a response, sent that second email that week toward the weekend. It wasn't quite the weekend, but I sent it out like Thursday or Friday. And I just said, hey, I'm not coming in anymore. This needs to be taken care of. And normally you don't say that to the assistant director of your store, but I was just not going to be taken advantage of. And I was like, you know what? I've only been here 3 weeks. It's not a big loss if I get fired over this. So on Sunday afternoon, keep in mind, I'd sent 2 emails throughout the previous week. I received an email from her. She said, I totally understand. Please work the shift today, and then we'll take care of all the shifts for the following week, meaning week 5. Well, the problem was that when she sent the email was immediately before the shift began on that Sunday. And I didn't see it for a couple hours after that anyway. So there was no way I could work it. So I responded to her and I thanked her and I said, but I can't work that shift today. So what happened is I ended up missing like 3 shifts in a row because I was waiting on her to respond to me and I had drawn my line and said, I'm not coming back in until this is fixed. At Target, if you no call, no show for 3 shifts in a row, you are supposed to be fired. I will say though that all of the other ETLs, my GSTL, and my GSAs were all very understanding when I came back in finally when this is taken care of. And I explained to them why I missed those shifts. And I just directly said, I was like, this is what happened. I told her I wasn't coming in. She took almost a week to respond to me. And they didn't ever say that was all right, but I never got written up. I never had anyone say anything negative to me. And they really genuinely seemed to understand that the ETL HR was the source of the problem, and I don't feel like it was held against me at all. I don't think I got a further response from her after that, but the schedules did start to be fixed. I was scheduled for like 19 hours or 15 hours or something, and that was what happened the majority of the summer. So pretty much the problem was taken care of, and that was that. I tried to let things go. I just sort of avoided her at work personally, but no hard feelings toward Target to any of that. It was just very frustrating that had to be the way that I started out working there. I didn't want to cause all that drama, but I felt like I had to because it was either that or just let them walk all over me. And so like I said, things did get changed, and I started working about 15 hours a week and, sometimes 18, and that was totally fine. The one caveat to that is that I felt like maybe, not quite every week, but almost every week, they would schedule me for like 21 hours or 20.5 hours. And I really was still slightly annoyed because I felt like I had made such an issue of this, and I felt like they were just pushing it. They were just pushing me to see how far they could do that. Like, because I remember they scheduled me one time for like 20.75 hours when the max is 20, and I was like, I'm not going to complain about this because technically once I take my breaks it will be under 20 hours. But it just really felt like they were intentionally pressing my buttons to see if they could get me to complain more about what was going on. But despite all of that drama at the beginning of me working there, pretty much everything else went really well. I got to know a lot of people at Target, and like, outside of work, I don't think we actually hung out, but Instagram, Snapchat, just like sort of interacting with people outside of work. And I don't feel like I had that kind of place where I could meet people and really got along with people since when I worked at Abercrombie. And I will say that my GSTL and even my ETLs, they were very happy with me. I mean, obviously, having been a retail manager for so long, it was nothing to step in and just learn cash register. And I learned it in about half an hour. I was very fast with my scan rates, so they generally would have me on the main registers or me being the only cashier for the store. I really quickly caught on to and I can't remember what they're called now, but the self scans, SCO, right? Self checkout. That's it. So I did really well with those. They generally had me run register one and monitor all the self checkouts by myself at any one time. They put me in charge of restocking all the batteries in the store, which were not just up front, but also scattered throughout the store. They put me in charge of restocking gift cards throughout the store, which were up front and throughout the store. They put me in charge of restocking all of the, I forget what they're called, but like the candy and snacks and little toys up by self-check and by the registers. And I eventually was put on a track to be a GSA, which I did not want to do. Now, the GSA is the Guest Service Associate. I think that's what that stands for. And it essentially is it's a management position, but without management authority and without management pay. And every single person that I saw, they would pick the people who were the best cashiers, take them off the line, and they would make them GSAs. And then they would just treat them terribly. Every single one of the cashiers that I saw get promoted into GSA during the 7 months I was there were fired within a month or two because they weren't doing what management wanted in the GSA position, because truthfully I think it was pretty unrealistic what they wanted. But I made it known that I did not want to be a GSA. And I think we kind of worked out an agreement where I had GSA access to registers. I did price override. I covered for GSAs and my GSTL while they were on break. I had the breakdown. I created the schedule for breaks. And I was front-end supervisor on Black Friday. So I do think that we had sort of an informal verbal agreement that, okay, we're going to make you a GSA in the system, but you're not officially a GSA, and you don't have to actually full-time do the GSA responsibilities. So that was an effective compromise for me. And part of the reason, obviously I didn't want to get in that position and be treated badly and get fired, but I also knew that this was super temporary for me, and they were always trying to find a way to increase my hours. So I felt like putting me into this like weird low-level management position was another attempt at them to not let me just work there. Just let me do my thing. Let me be a cashier. And speaking of that, I was always listed as, on my paycheck, my title was guest service team member. Except that I wasn't guest service, because when I was hired, they gave me the option of what I wanted to do. They said, do you want to work in electronics? Do you want to be at guest service? Or do you want to be a cashier? And I said, I want to be a cashier. So for some reason, I worked as a cashier, but my paychecks said my title was guest service team member. Now, I did eventually start working at guest service, against my will, really, but I was over there. I did learn that, and I would say maybe less than a quarter of the time I was at guest service. Normally when I was over there, it was closing it down for the night, which was really the difficult part of guest service. I just saw my miscategorization as being a guest service team member just to be another thing that Target just couldn't get right, and that no one seemed to care to correct. One thing I feel like I have to mention about Target is about the pay. Target was telling the media that they were hiring everyone at $12 an hour and that by 2020 the pay would be $15 an hour. And maybe that's true. Maybe by next year they will raise it. So far they've raised it to 11, or no, from 11 to 13. But at the time I was working there, they were telling everyone, hey, everyone at Target makes $12 an hour. And that's not true. I was hired in July of 2018, and I made $11 an hour from July until sometime in October. So starting, I think it was in July or maybe August, they were telling everyone in the media that everybody at Target makes $12 an hour, and that's not true. They made some sort of rule that if you had been hired that year, that you wouldn't get a raise, or you wouldn't get a raise until October, whereas everybody who had been there since before January of 2018 got the raise immediately, or something weird like that. But essentially, they were paying me $1 less than what they were telling the media their minimum hourly wage was. I don't want to make it out like working at Target was terrible, because I was really good at it, and therefore I think because of that, I really genuinely liked it. And I became sort of the go-to person for my GSTL. I even became the official trainer of other cashiers. So from the period from about August to about October, everything went by pretty well. I did have those annoyances of HR always trying to overschedule me over my availability, but beyond that, I actually, in the day-to-day operation of the store, got along pretty well with everyone, liked my job, and felt pretty confident in what I did because I felt that I was really being pretty successful. But before I move on to why I eventually quit Target, I have to address a few more issues that happened. And the first one is my name tag. So you'll see there, it says new team member. Well, why is it that I worked there for 7 months and still had a name tag that said new team member? Well, you can probably guess who factors into this story. See, we got these on that day that we were at orientation, and everybody else in my training class got their own personalized name tags about a month, maybe even only 2 weeks after we started. But I just never did. It had actually become this running joke with my managers because I was their go-to guy, and they knew that I knew what I was doing. I'd been there for quite a while, almost pushing a year, and yet I still didn't have my own name tag. So it was always a joke with them. But they also knew exactly the reason why, and that was just for whatever reason, the ETL HR just never ordered it. And then there was the issue with the discount card. So on our training day, we were given a paper one that we used temporarily, and everybody else in my training class, within, say, like a month, got a permanent version. Me? Mine was ordered in January of this year, meaning I'd been there 7 months before it showed up. And I never picked it up because at that point, I had like 2 shifts left. So, why? Why would you wait until after I've put in my 2-week notice to even order my permanent discount card after 7 months? Just sheer incompetence. And there's one last issue. I thought I was going to save a ton of money when I started working at Target because Target has a grocery section. And I thought that if I bought my groceries there, I would save money because of our discount. But here's the thing about Target's discount. It's not good. Most places I've worked have maybe a 30 or 40% discount for staff. Even when I worked in real estate, a lot of times you got a 20% discount on your rent. But at Target, you get 10%. And there's an aspect of Target's discount that I have never seen anywhere else that makes it very difficult to actually use the employee discount. So in order to use the employee discount at Target, you have to carry cash. And I mean, who my age carries cash, right? We're going to use a card. Or you have to use the Target card, the red card. You can't use a check, you can't use your debit card, or a credit card, you're stuck either signing up for Target's card, that of course they want you to have, or paying cash. And that's the only way that you can use your discount. With that being said, the Target Red Card gets you 5% off, but when you combine that with the employee discount, it sounds like it would be 15%. It actually comes out to being like 14 or 14.5%. So I thought I was going to be saving a ton of money, but then I realized I don't really spend very much money, and my grocery budget at that time, it's lower now, was $300 a month. Well, if I saved 10% on $300 a month, I'd be saving $30 a month. But when you consider that Target's groceries are more expensive than most other places, then that $30 is not going to matter. I'm going to have spent more than that $30 I saved with the discount by buying more expensive groceries at Target. So it really didn't have any effect whatsoever. And I think the only way that it would make sense to use your discount to save a ton of money is if you're buying large ticket items. So like a $1,000 TV and you get a $100 discount. But also you work at Target and make $12 an hour, so you're probably not going to be making purchases like that. Sometime around October, Lyft cut our pay again, which led me to start looking for a higher paying part-time job that would help supplement the income that I was losing from the cut pay there at the full-time job. Whole Foods had just recently said that they were raising their wage to $15 an hour, and I was currently making $12 at Target. So I applied at Whole Foods and I got a job there. So normally when you get a new job, you would put in a 2-week notice at the job and then start the new job. And what happened in reality was I went to get a voluntary resignation form from Target and got that from the HR office. I filled out that form and I went back to Target to drop it off. However, I forgot the form at home. So instead of putting the form on HR's desk, filled out the voluntary resignation form online. So I went into the intranet, I found instructions for how to do this through the time management system we had, which I don't remember now what it's even called. It might have been Kronos, or it might have been Workday. I think that's what it was called. Anyway, I followed the instructions to put in my resignation through that, and I filled out the exit interview. And I, as far as I knew, was going to only work another 2 weeks at Target. In the meantime, I had started doing my training and then my first working shifts at Whole Foods. So it was a big surprise to me when I continued to be scheduled at Target. Target just completely ignored that I had put in my 2-week notice and just continued to schedule me. And as we established before, when a problem like this happens, there's no one to talk to about it. But I also really desperately needed the money. So I started looking at the schedules, and I saw for the first week, I was like, well, the shifts that Target gave me don't actually conflict with Whole Foods, so all right, let's do this. So I was working full-time at Lyft, 20 hours a week at Target, and 25 hours a week at Whole Foods. But I needed the money, so I was like, all right, let's do this. And I continued to do this from late October of 2018 until January of 2019, working at both places. If Whole Foods would have known that I was doing that, I would have gotten fired at Whole Foods, because they do consider Target to be a direct competitor. But to my credit, I did try to resign at Target, and they wouldn't let me, and just ignored it. And had I just left and stopped working after 2 weeks, and I would have eventually got termed out for job abandonment, even though I had given notice and they just chose to ignore it. So during this time period from, let's say, very late October until the first week or so of January when I quit Target, which is the busy holiday season, somehow throughout that entire time period, I only had 2 shifts that conflicted. The first one was December 16th. This was the first time that I ever had to get anyone at Target to cover a shift for me. There was a swap board in the back, and I put my name and my shift on there, and someone signed up for it. And the way this process is supposed to work is that the managers check those boards, and they then take the person who originally had the shift off the schedule and put the person who signed up for the shift on the schedule. The 16th, I think, was a weekend or something, and it was several days after that that I had my next shift. And when I came in for my next shift, one of the cashiers says something to me about, hey, what were they talking about? I heard the managers talking the other day about you no call, no showing. And I'm like, what? And I genuinely had no idea what she was talking about. I thought about it throughout my shift. And then I realized the guy didn't show up for the shift that he took from me. Now, yeah, it's his fault that he didn't show up. But it's also, guess who? The ETL HR's fault that she didn't change the schedule like she's supposed to. So essentially what happened is she didn't check the swap board, didn't change the schedule, so that no one knew that this guy had taken my shift, and it just showed that I didn't show up, when in reality, he didn't show up. And once again, now I'm in trouble for something, and I have no one that I can go to explain it. So I've broken the trust, and it was pretty obvious that they were disappointed in me in both my ETL GE, I think that's what they're called, and the GSTL. And at this point, because it's been so many days, and because, like, I am just kind of disgusted with everything there, I chose not to even try to bring it up with them. I probably could have, but I just felt like, at that point, they had already made their decision about me, that, like, they thought that they had previously been wrong, and that I was not good, and I was not dependable, and it was all because of this missed shift. And I was just like, you know what, I've got too much going on. I'm just, like, not even going to address this. Fast forward to that weekend, and I have my second shift that conflicts. It's December 23rd. It's the Saturday before Christmas. I've been trying to get this shift covered for a while. I've had it up on the swap board. I've talked to people about it. But every single person in the store is scheduled on December 23rd. I cannot get anyone to cover it because literally everyone is already there. But I'm also scheduled at Whole Foods. And as you guys will find out when I make my video about Whole Foods does not exactly make it easy to get a schedule change or get somebody to cover for you. So that wasn't an option there. So I had to get out of the shift at Target. And I wanted to do it the proper way and not just not show up. On December 22nd, I closed the store the night before I had to call off for the shift. And I actually was working directly with the STL, which is the store team lead, the head manager of the store. He had kind of taken me under his wing and was teaching me some more management stuff. And that just adds really to this being so difficult and disappointing, I guess. The very next morning, I'm on my way to my shift to Whole Foods, and I call the store, ask for an LOD, which is lead on duty, and the STL picks up. And from what I hear from the other people that work there, this is actually a pretty rare occurrence. But he comes on the line, and I said, hey, just letting you know, heads up, I'm not going to be able to come in for my shift today. And he's like, well, why not? And quite honestly, I really hadn't thought of a reason because I didn't think that I needed a reason. You know, whether it's me being sick or, you know, somebody in the family died or whatever it is, I feel like if I need to call off work, I just let you know as a courtesy, but I'm not going to come into work. And he made me give him a reason. Well, I told him I was sick, and it wasn't true, and I don't feel right about lying about it. But I also was sort of perplexed that I needed to give a reason. And the thing is, when I called him, I was out in the freezing cold outside, and I was sniffling. I really did sound sick, even though I wasn't. So I said, I'm sick. And there was a long, awkward pause, and he said, you know it's the Saturday before Christmas. I said, yes. And then there was a very long, awkward pause, like he was waiting for me to say something. And it was definitely him guilt tripping me and obviously giving me a very hard time about calling off. And he said, okay. Like, cheerfully after that, he was like, okay, it'll be noted. And almost like in a threatening way, like it's like, all right, well, call off today, but fuck you. I was just thinking of this as a common sense issue. What if I really was sick? You wouldn't have given me the option. You would have given me such a hard time about it. Um, and the thing is, look, dude, I realize that you want everybody there so that you can get a bonus, because that's what your job is about, is the numbers that the store puts up. But I make $12 an hour no matter what. I mean, if you want me to care about the sales volume of the store, you, or staffing or whatever, like, you need to give me a reason to do that. That incident in and of itself really is what made my decision. I already knew that I was going to have to give up one of my part-time jobs because I just simply couldn't work 4 jobs. And I had this new full-time job that I was starting on January 2nd. With the way the STL treated me, that made that decision. I actually think it was the very next day. I had a shift to work on Christmas Eve. I came in, put in my 2-week notice, and this time I put it in writing, on paper. I took a picture of it on HR's door, taped to their door, put it in the system, did the exit interview, because I wasn't coming in anymore, but I wanted to make sure that they weren't going to say that I abandoned the job and just marked me as not rehireable. I didn't want to leave on bad terms, but it felt like I didn't really have much of another choice, because I just could not get the people who were in charge to operate things properly. And then when the consequences of them doing that came up, I couldn't get anyone to talk to me about those issues to resolve them. So I knew that that would probably be an issue too with me quitting, and having seen that they already once ignored me putting in my 2-week notice, I didn't have any reason to think that they would not ignore it a second time. To be quite honest, I have no idea how my employment with Target ended. I had put in the notice, and I feel like just to spite me, when they put out the following week's schedule, they took all of my hours away. But that still meant that I had a couple of shifts left for what I had already been scheduled for, and I worked one of them, and I let my GSA know that I would not be there for the other one because it was going to conflict with my new full-time work schedule. She took care of it and found somebody to cover the shift for me. But that was pretty much the end of my employ at Target. And I know this video has been pretty negative, but that's not really the experience that I had at Target. Like, for the most part, it was anywhere from okay to kinda alright. And that was all I really was expecting out of a part-time job. I didn't go in with high expectations. And when you look at the reasons that I was so frustrated and the problems that I had when I was there, they almost entirely come down to one person. And maybe that is what happened. Maybe my ETL HR was just completely incompetent, and that made my experience there not good. If that's the case, then that might mean that people that work at other stores won't have a bad experience. But because that's what happened to me, Target was the one that had to go. And with all that being said, I mean, working there at the store, I obviously got more acquainted with the brand and started being in Targets far more than I ever was before, because I grew up in an area where Target doesn't exist. So I got much more familiar with the store, and I probably shop there and even just go there to like walk around more now than, really much more now than I ever have before. So I don't have anything against the brand. I think the most likely scenario is my ETL HR was just dumb as a box. But for those of you who are subscribers and have wondered for all this time why I no longer work at Target, that's why.